21st century Judaism. Achat shalti meit Adonai ota avakesh. Achat shalti meit Adonai ota avakesh. One thing I ask of the Holy One. It is this that I seek. We have officially been singing these words for 40 days at this point. Taken from the middle verses of Psalm 27, these words are somewhere between an anthem and a mantra of the month of Elul and the days of awe. We are invited to include them in our morning practice starting on Rosh Chodesh Elul and to journey with them all the way through the gates of the new year and throughout Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. Having just celebrated my 40th birthday, the number 40 holds personal meaning. But even more so, the number 40 here holds spiritual significance. As a Jewish number, it indicates the completion of a cycle or a chapter, be it in one's life or in mythic time. Noah, his family, and a pair of every species of the living world spent 40 days in the ark, waiting for the flood to recede. Moses spent 40 days and 40 nights on top of Mount Sinai, receiving the 10 Commandments from the Holy One. The Israelites spent 40 years in the wilderness. These are all periods of revelation and transformation. So when we mark the period of intense reflection and introspection from Elul through Yom Kippur, and articulate that it is a 40-day period, what we are saying, what our sages are teaching us, is that it is enough time to develop new insights. It is enough time to transform us individually and collectively. So what practices have defined this 40-day period? The blowing of the shofar, the practice of teshuvah, and reciting Psalm 27. There are other practices that are specific to the 10-day period between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but those three are specific to the entire 40-day period. Each of these practices is meant to impact us, to call our attention inward, to wake us up, to connect us to our deepest longings. But why? For what purpose? The second half of that verse in Psalm 27 continues, Shivti beveit Adonai kol yemei chayai lachazot benoam Adonai ulevaker beheichalo Lachazot benoam Adonai ulevaker beheichalo. To dwell in the house of the Holy One all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the divine, to visit her palace, but for a moment. As a religious person, I can appreciate the poetry here. To feel called into the presence, to imagine divine light radiating out, to feel so intimately connected to all of life that it feels like we are together dwelling in the inner sanctum always. This is a fulfillment of a deep spiritual longing to restore the feeling of connection that perhaps we once knew or have always longed for. A connection to all life, to the divine itself. But if I am honest, if I am only asking for one thing, this is not it. At least not often. We are living through profound environmental and political uncertainty. There is a pervasive sense of urgency in our world. The foundation of our world, both the natural world and the human world, feels precarious. So I've been asking myself, what is the one thing I'm asking? What is my biggest, most burning question? What might be the one thing each of you has been asking yourself? What might be the one thing each of you is asking today? And how might I offer some guidance so we can articulate and respond to the biggest, most urgent questions we are facing collectively? Leonard Peltier, a Native activist, wrote in his book Prison Writings, "My life is my Sundance," quoting, "I don't know how to save the world. I don't have answers or the answer. I hold no secret knowledge as to how to fix the mistakes of generations past and present. I only know that without compassion and respect for all of Earth's inhabitants, none of us will survive, nor will we deserve to." Let me begin here with his humble wisdom. I have no secret knowledge about how to fix the mistakes of generations past and present. I don't have the answers or the answer. This is not only okay, it is intentional. Judaism pays much more attention to the need to question than our need for answers. We have not been singing Achalt Teshuvah, this is the one answer I have. This is the one question I have on our minds. Achat sha'alti me'et Adonai, what is the one thing you are asking Yah, the Holy One? Before we even teach our kids to read, we teach them to recite the 4 questions at the Passover Seder. In fact, this year at our family Seder, we decided that for every question a kid asked, they got extra dessert. We never mentioned that this traditional dessert at a Passover Seder is the afikomen. But we rewarded them by having them dip it in chocolate. It led to so many amazing questions, most of which had no clear answer. Our cultural love of questions is so deep that it feels Jewish to answer a question with a question. Not only that, but some of our most important stories are themselves about questions. Take, for example, the story told of Hillel, that a person came to him and asked, "Can you please explain to me Judaism on one foot?" To which he famously responded, "Love your neighbor as yourself. The rest is commentary. Now go and learn." Rabbi Hillel's answer is brilliant and beloved, but the question is ultimately the more important lesson from the story. The idea that we can ask a question that's looking for the essence of a thing, the brief version of what is otherwise unanswerable. For this reason, the phrase al regel achat, on one foot, has become its own adage. It's how the story is known, not by its answer, but by its question. In fact, the Talmud's literary style teaches us the importance of asking every possible question, of proliferating answers and recording dissenting opinions. As a student, I was taught that upon studying a new passage of the Mishnah or the Talmud, the first thing that I should do is list every possible question I have about the text. It almost never mattered if we answered them. It was the practice of generating questions that we were being taught to do. The emphasis is so much on the questions that when disagreements arise, even amidst the answers, there is no pressure to resolve them. Often a Talmudic dispute simply ends with the word teku, which is Aramaic for the question stands. Which is to say that our spiritual ancestors have also felt that they don't have the answers or the answer to the questions of their time. But that didn't stop them from sitting around and asking the essential questions of their time. And it shouldn't stop us. In the words of the Egyptian poet and revolutionary Edmond Jabez, the question has always been, is, and will remain our best political weapon. What I have realized over the past 40 days is that my big, burning question, the one thing I am asking myself over and over again, the one thing I want to ask the Holy One, is actually not a new question. In a world that has endless righteous demands for our attention, how do we know what to do? And when? As it turns out, this question is quite ancient. A story is told in the Babylonian Talmud. Rabbi Tarfon and the elders were reclining in Nitzah's attic in the town of Lod when someone asked this question, Talmud Gadol or Maaseh Gadol? Is study greater or is action greater? Perhaps this story, or even just this question, is a bit familiar to you. Let me begin by asking you to suspend what you know it to be as we explore the different possibilities and translations and interpretations of it. First, when I say greater, I'm not even sure what I mean or what they meant. It's my first question about this question. What does it mean to be gadol? The word Hebrew gadol can be big, as in big or great. This can refer to size or to stature. But it can also refer to gadol as in to be weighty, to have importance, to be greater conceptually, not necessarily physically. Are they asking which should you do more of? Which is gadol in size or time? Or which is gadol in importance? Which is more important to do? Which should take precedence, priority? Which should you do first? We've already generated about 20 questions about the question. I wonder, if you were stranded on a desert island and you could only choose one way to spend your time, are they asking, should you choose study or action? Now, if you're anything like me, you might be asking, well, it depends. What kind of ma'aseh, what kind of action are we talking about? The word ma'aseh comes from the infinitive la'asot, meaning to do or to make. It is the final word in the opening story of creation in Genesis. We invoke it every Friday night just before Kiddush, declaring, Vayevarech Elohim et yom hashvi v'kadesh oto ki vo shavat mikol malachto asher bara Elohim la'asot. And the Holy One blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because on it the Holy One ceased their work that they had created to do. This sentence would have made much more sense without the final la'asot, to do. It would have read, and the Holy One blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because on the Holy One ceased their work that they had created. I can hear the voices of my high school English teachers. This biblical phrase includes a dangling clause. So what's la'asot doing here? Commentators explain that its mysterious presence here is a reminder that once the Holy One has completed ma'aseh v'reshit, the work of creation, the work of the world is ours to do, la'asot. So when the rabbis are sitting around in Nitzah's attic asking about study or action, are they talking about ma'aseh, as in the mundane work of the world? Are they asking about getting things done? I am someone who keeps to-do lists, both at work and on my fridge. I love to run errands and get things done. The laundry, food shopping, the hardware store, the bike shop. I even love going to the post office. These are all very real things that I have to do, much of which are part of domestic labor, so often unacknowledged and underappreciated. Are the rabbis asking, is it better to study or to get things done? Because that's a tough call. Or are we talking about ma'aseh as in taking action, like attending a protest or organizing? Is the question, is it better to study or go to an action? Hachat sha'alti me'et Adonai, one thing I ask, in a world that is built on stolen beams, a world that is heating up, a world that is at war, a world governed by greed, I do often find myself asking, what should I do? Should I study or should I act? Let me dwell here for a moment to make explicit that when the rabbis in the Talmud say, what I think the rabbis in the Talmud are saying is that they are describing both the very specific, sorry, I'm missing a word there. Let me dwell here to make explicit that when the rabbis are invoking the word Talmud, right? Talmud or maaseh, learning or action, I think they are both describing the very specific practice of Talmud Torah, of Torah study, and also a more general category of learning and spiritual practice. And it happens that Talmud is their primary spiritual practice. But for us, study might mean something else. It might mean prayer or meditation, exercise, reading, breathing, talking to a beloved friend, cooking, martial arts, yoga. The things we do to replenish, to find calm and clarity in our homes, with others, in nature, here at Kol Tzedek. And similarly, when the rabbis talk about ma'aseh, I think they are also thinking of actions that fall generally into the category of mitzvot, like visiting the sick and burying the dead, and the link and the like, which are their primary realm of action. So when they're asking about Talmud or Maaseh, they're asking about which mitzvah they should do. The mitzvah of Torah study or the mitzvah of other obligations, of caring for those in their community. But it may be that for us, Maaseh includes other, perhaps more contemporary forms of action, no less spiritual obligations themselves, perhaps forms of tikkun olam, like organizing, canvassing, protesting, phone banking, and the many forms of disruption and trouble we get ourselves into. The tension between study and action has honestly animated much of my adult life, perhaps yours as well. It pulls me back to a time in my life when I was really struggling with this question. Talmud Gadol or Maaseh Gadol? What should I do next? I was in my mid-20s, living in San Francisco. I had decided to fulfill my lifelong dream and apply to rabbinical school. But I needed to improve my Hebrew to pass the entrance exam. So I decided to travel to Jerusalem with 3 friends to study Hebrew and to understand for myself what I had been taught about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which I say in quotes. We had enrolled in a municipal ulpan, a government-sponsored opportunity to study Hebrew. The class was almost entirely made up of Palestinians who were also hoping to learn Hebrew so they could find work in Jerusalem. It was the summer of 2006. 2 days after arriving, the state of Israel went to war with Lebanon and Gaza. Lebanon and Gaza were under lockdown. Protests broke out. Caught in the midst of a political situation I did not fully understand, a friend and I connected with a group called Birthright Unplugged. We dropped out of our ulpan and spent 10 days traveling around the West Bank, visiting with Palestinians, trading one kind of learning for another. And then we spent the better part of that entire summer living in Ramallah and traveling around the West Bank, attending Palestinian-led demonstrations to save people's homes, their olive orchards, to defend their access to water, We would gather as a group, internationals, Israelis, Palestinians. We were told to always bring a bandana and an onion because it helped to diffuse the inevitable pepper spray. I remember that in the month leading up to this trip, I had a nightmare that I was going to be in a war zone running from gunfire. When I woke up that morning, my girlfriend at the time told me not to worry. I was, after all, only going to study Hebrew. But there I was, on a Friday in the town of Bilin, as we approached the edge of this community's olive grove, where the Israeli government was trying to build a wall. And I could feel that I was part of something much larger, as if this was performance art, as if everyone knew exactly how the script unfolded. A Palestinian couple attempted to walk past the blockade so they could get married on their ancestral land, and the army met them with tear gas and tanks. Protesters threw rocks with handmade slingshots. The army began shooting metal bullets, and the group dispersed. I ran off with one friend, dunking in and out of stone walls and hiding behind fruit trees. In one moment, I stood and watched a bullet, as if in slow motion, it zoomed past my chest, within inches of my body. We took shelter in the home of an elderly Palestinian family who served us fresh-picked plums, so accustomed to this violence that it required no mention. I spent the rest of that summer traveling around the West Bank, running from gunfire and tear gas, listening to the stories of Palestinians, and using my body as a human shield. I returned home to San Francisco, devastated, traumatized, informed, and transformed. I joined an Arab-led organizing group protesting the continued war in Gaza and Lebanon. I attended organizing meetings and protests. I got arrested more than once. I slept very little. I was grieving my relationship to the state of Israel, to the state in general, and to the Judaism of my childhood. I was also waking up. I saw that the very war zone I feared and encountered in Palestine was also present for Black and brown communities in every neighborhood I had ever lived. I was agitated and motivated. Everything felt urgent. Everything felt urgent, and I did everything I could do to think of. After a few months of nonstop direct action, I was utterly exhausted. I hadn't paced myself, and I started to experience a kind of inner collapse. I remember the afternoon that I biked all the way across San Francisco to arrive at the Pacific Ocean. I stood at the beach screaming and crying into the horizon. I was so overwhelmed by my own growing awareness of the world's injustice. I understood then that I needed more spiritual tools to sustain me. I considered leaving Judaism behind altogether. Perhaps I could become a part of a religion that was truly pacifist, that truly honored the dignity of every person. And if not, then I needed to become a rabbi so that we could create that Judaism together. I decided then to actually apply to rabbinical school. I needed the spiritual tools. I needed to be able to translate the prayers for myself so no one could quote verse and Torah and tell me what it meant, so I could do it on my own. It was a profound moment of asking myself, Talmud Gadol or Ma'aseh Gadol? What is more important in this moment, learning or action? My entire spiritual and political development has been about the interaction between the two. Learning leading to action, and action leading to more learning. But it has also been hard to know which, in any given moment, is more urgent, more timely, more needed, more useful. Not just in the abstract, not just when you're in a war zone, but here, in our everyday lives. I ask this question every time there is a citywide or nationwide protest planned on Shabbat. Talmud Gadol or Maaseh Gadol? What's more important this week? Shabbat, spiritual practice, Torah study, or taking action, attending the protest that I also believe in deeply? So let's return to Nitzah's attic and see how our sages answer this question. As a reminder, because it was a while ago now, a group of sages were talking, and one of them asked a question. I love to imagine them. They were reclining, the text says. It wasn't quite a Passover Seder, but they were relaxed in each other's presences. When the question arises, what's greater, study or action? First, Rabbi Tarfon answers, saying ma'aseh, action is greater. Let us remember he is the same rabbi who says, you are not obligated to finish the task, but neither are you free to desist from it. Then Rabbi Akiva answers, saying, no, Talmud Gadol, study is greater. Pausing here, let's just notice that some of our greatest sages disagree, rather gracefully. There is no one right answer in this text. They are figuring it out by asking the question together. Now, in response to both Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva, everyone in Nitzah's attic had a collective moment of clarity. It arises in the text almost as epiphany, and they all respond, Talmud Gadol, shehat Talmud mevi lidei maaseh. Study is greater, for it leads to action. Now you might be thinking, how cliche. Of course the rabbis think study is greater. They are, after all, building an entire lineage based on the importance of Talmud Torah. They would not be playing their part in the family system if they didn't find a way to say Talmud Gadol. But let's notice that they don't all chime in and agree with Rabbi Akiva, which they could have. Rabbi Akiva had, after all, just spoken. They actually pause, they reflect, and they add an important insight. Study is great, but not for its own sake. Study is great because it leads us to action. So then the rabbis ask, doesn't that mean action is greater then? If that's the ultimate goal? To which Rashi comments, study is greater because it leads us to action, which means we end up doing both. Nimtzu shnehem beyado. We find both of them in our hands. But I think it's more than that. When I taught this text a few summers ago, my students helped me understand that study is greater because it leads us into the hand of action, which is to say, it leads us to wise action. It leads us to the heart of the matter. It leads us to action from a centered, embodied place. Menachem ben Shlomo HaMeiri, also known as HaMeiri, was a famous Catalan rabbi who lived in the 13th century. And he actually reframes this moment. He says, the reason it says, Talmud Gadol shemevi lidei maaseh, is that if you don't know what action you need to take, that if you do know what action you need to take, go ahead and do it. But if you don't, stop and study, reflect, pause, and learn, because that will also lead you to action. That will lead you to the right course of action, which is to say, study and action are equally important, but for different reasons and in different moments. Which is to say, the reason that we so need that dangling la'asot at the end of that final verse of creation, because the work of the world is ours to do.
That's right.
Ma'aseh is gadol, but only the right ma'aseh. only the right actions. And it often takes study and learning to find the wisdom to know what to do. Now, lots of practical questions arise as we are thinking about all these other questions. For example, should we stop and interrupt our Torah study to attend a wedding or a funeral? What if we're doing ma'aseh? What if we're doing learning, and the important ma'aseh arises? Another one they ask, should we interrupt Torah study to go to the bathroom, or to take care of our bodies, or to take care of other people's bodies? And fear not, the Talmud find ways to address all of these questions. But more so than offering you their answers, I want to invite each of us to ask ourselves these questions in our own lives. When do I need to study? And when do I need to act? When do I need to interrupt my study to act? The rabbis in the Talmud even tell stories about themselves interrupting their teachings to use the bathroom, and the moment in which they have to remind their students to wait until they come out of the bathroom so they have a chance to say the blessing, replace their talit and tefillin before they can answer more of their students' questions. They not only pause their study, but they pause their teaching to take care of their bodies. Practically and personally, I have been waiting for the moment in which I can confess to you that I have interrupted my own study and my own teaching and leading on Zoom so many times during the pandemic to wipe my kids' tushes in the bathroom. If you ever see the camera go off for just a moment, this is likely why. With great gratitude for the ability to turn off the camera, and for the wisdom of our ancestors who say the priority is to take care of our bodies, even when we are teaching and studying Torah. So from all of this, and from all of my learning about this, I want to share with you that even though learning is greater, there are 3 circumstances when ma'aseh, when action takes precedent. Number 1, action takes precedent when we know what to do and how to do it. Number 2, action takes precedent when we need to care for our bodies and to care for each other. And number 3, action takes precedent when it fulfills another obligation that is time-bound, that is time-limited, as in attending a funeral or a wedding, something that can't be put on hold and that would bring tremendous measure and benefit to another. In fact, the rabbis go further. They extend the categories of things for which action takes precedent. They make explicit that if you see injustice in your home, you are obligated to protest it, to take action. If you see injustice in your town or your city, you are obligated to take action. If you see injustice in the world, you are obligated to take action. And when the text says, if you see, what it means is that if you are able to recognize injustice and you know what to do about it, as opposed to needing to figure out and learn, which is another worthy option when you see injustice. This is an obligation I know we take very seriously as a community. It is, after all, our namesake, Kol Tzedek, a voice for justice. It's helpful to see that when we dig deeper into this conversation, there isn't actually a clear binary between study and action. This is not a privileged armchair conversation. This is about our real lives and the choices we need to make about how we live and what we prioritize. There are so many infinite resources in this world, love and care, but time is not one of them. Our time is finite, and the rabbis knew that well. When study and action are done together, they deepen and strengthen each other. And that is what the rabbis mean when they say, Talmud Gadol shemevi lidei ma'aseh. Spiritual practices are so important because they shape and sustain our actions in the world. Our learning shapes and sustains our action in the world for the better. It can be so hard to prioritize learning and spiritual practice in a world on fire, in a city aching with injustice, in a country banning access to abortion and undermining the right to vote. It is essential to hear this in a crucial election year. An election I am not only counting on you to vote in, but also counting on you to help get out the vote. It is precisely because there is so much we need to do in this world that we need to prioritize our own inner lives and the spiritual practices that keep us connected to what we feel is right and just, the practices that sustain our capacity to act, which is ours to do in this world. One of the most important lessons I learned from my time living in Palestine and in San Francisco, one of the core reasons I decided to enter rabbinical school, was to develop spiritual practices to support, sustain, and guide my work for justice in the world. It is perhaps what I feel I am most able to share, teach, and transmit to each of you. Your spiritual practices are invaluable. They are so important, not despite every demand on your time, because of every demand on your time. Time you spend in prayer, time you spend studying Torah, meditating, taking a walk, exercising, practicing a martial art, or playing an instrument, and any other activity that supports mindfulness and presence is time well spent. It is gadol. It is so important. It will transform your day, your week, your year. The way the rabbis express this is to say that Torah study has no measure. There is no defined amount, no time limit. We can never be done with it, which is like saying, you can't overdo it. Ein lahem shiur. It is limitless, both in the time we can devote to it and its benefit to us and the world. But fear not, it doesn't have to be a lot of time. Studies show that 12 minutes a day of mindful practice will have a dramatic impact on your mental health and your state of being. Who among us does not need something to support our mental health and our state of being? In my own experience, a little bit of meditation or prayer changes the scope of an entire day. It settles my anxiety, leads me to more clarity. Sometimes it takes as much as 3 minutes for me to place on my talit and say the Shema, and then dayenu. Enough. The day goes on. But it matters that the days that I do it, it matters. And the days that I don't do it, I miss it. I feel it. If you don't yet have your own personal spiritual practice, 5783 might just be your year. Talmud gadol shehatalmud mevi lidei maaseh. This is what the rabbis meant when they said study leads to wiser action, which is what our world needs. Yes. It doesn't just need us to do things. It needs us to do things mindfully. It needs us to be embodied and careful. It needs us to be intentional in how we act in this world. It needs us to care and sustain for ourselves. In the words of Dane Cutler, and God says, you who are exhausted with the work already, you with the asphalt-worn boots, with the house full of placards, you who are always breathing in, preparing to shout, who sees the work everywhere and swallows the impossible sea of it, breathe out, weary ones. Prepare yourself to go in and to go in deep. Find the work inside, the work of self-kindness, the work of healing, the work of repair. The work on the street will still be there when you re-enter. Dane concludes, the world needs you whole. That is, in fact, the first work that is ours to do, to make ourselves whole, to bring ourselves to this work as whole as possible. The fact that you have already managed to be here today, to carve out 25 hours on Yom Kippur, means you are well on your way. You have the discipline that it takes. You have the courage. This is not beyond your reach. And secondly, you are not alone in it. Look around. Gaze through the gallery on Zoom. Take a moment to look up or down or around you here in the Calvary Chapel. Consider reaching out to a friend to brainstorm ideas. Consider reaching out to me. Let's find time to connect after the holidays. There is nothing I would rather do than support each of you to develop your own spiritual practices. When we prioritize study and spiritual practice, when we ask big, unanswerable questions, we are not abandoning the work of the world. We are supporting and sustaining it. We are setting ourselves up to be more courageous, compassionate people, which is what the world needs. Achat sha'alti me'et Adonai, what is the one question you are asking this Yom Kippur? What are the big questions you are asking yourself this year? And how might you begin to answer them? How might you sit with their discomfort, with the unknown? Perhaps you might ask yourself, what is going to be my limud, my Talmud, my spiritual practice this year? What new text might I want to study? What new practice might I want to take on that will help me better do my ma'aseh, better do my work in this world? Help me to understand what my work in the world is. This Yom Kippur, this year, I pray that we have the courage and the discipline to take the time to meditate and reflect on these questions, to be with the uncertainty and fear embedded within them, that we may emerge with greater clarity and compassion about how we each can make the world and ourselves more whole. Gemar Chatima Tova. May it be so.
Amen. Achat sha'alti met Hashem otavakesh. Achat sha'alti met Hashem otavakesh. Shivti beveit Hashem kol yemei chayai lachazor b'noam Hashem. Shivti beveit Hashem kol yemei chayai lachazor b'noam Hashem ulevaker b'chalom ulevaker b'chalom ulevaker b'chalom ulevaker b'chalom. Achat sha'alti met Hashem otavakesh. Achat sha'alti met Hashem otavakesh.
May it be that when we ask these big questions, we realize that the practices and the studies that lead us there, that we feel forever that we are dwelling in the house of the Holy One all the days of our lives.
Amen.